Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. Lama Kathy, we're so happy to have you with us in our book study. So I would like to welcome everybody to Santa Monica KTC's Thursday night virtual Sangha. We will be doing the book study, Joy. What's the book?
It's Joy of Wisdom.
The book. I was going to say Joy of Living. Yeah, Joy of Wisdom, Joyful Wisdom. And I'm going to leave it up to you, Lama Kathy, to start. We'd like to have everybody put their microphones on mute, please. And we will begin. Thank you.
All right. And any other information from the organizers, or should we just go ahead and begin? Okay, they're shaking their heads. All right, so it's thumbs up. All right. Well, good evening, Jody, and all of the friends from Santa Monica KTC. I'm coming to you live from downtown Newark, Ohio, where I have been working with you folks the last few months, studying very slowly, the book Joyful Wisdom by Mingyur Rinpoche. And he's covering some of the basics of Buddhism in his book, where he talks about the Four Noble Truths. Right now, he's in the midst of discussing the second of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. I mean, the truth of the cause of suffering, because the first of the Four Noble Truths is that suffering is part of life. The second is that suffering has a cause. The third is that there is a solution to suffering. And the fourth is that there is a path or a method for undoing the causes of suffering. And so he's talking about how knowing yourself better, knowing yourself sort of intimately, is a way of opening up, I guess you could say, the box in which our suffering is contained. And by learning the causes of suffering, we can begin to suss out, we can begin to figure out the solutions to that suffering. And I love the examples that Mingyur Rinpoche gives, because they're from our everyday life. We're in chapter 3 right now, and he's just finished talking about causes and conditions. And there's a difference between the causes of suffering and the conditions for suffering. The basic the Buddha's teaching was that the cause of suffering is clinging and fixation. And of all of the things we cling to and fixate on, we cling to and fixate on our self-concept the most, me or I, and all the stories we tell ourselves about our life. For example, you can have something happen that is painful or disappointing, but there's more to it than just the disappointment and the pain. There's also the story we tell ourselves about that pain, the story we tell ourselves about the situation. Maybe we've had a lot of pain in our life, and we're beginning to feel the weight of all of that pain piling up on us. And so we're beginning to feel unfortunate, or maybe unlucky. And we're trying to think about what that means. What does it mean to be unlucky? And then we form a story about that. So there's a lot of our suffering that comes from the way we think about things. And so this is what Mingyur Rinpoche is getting at in his discussion in chapter 3 about the suffering that we experience that can be sort of self-created. And if you're in the book, we started last sorry, we ended last month with the idea of the conditions that bring about suffering in our life. And he was talking about the differences in Asian culture and Western culture's ideas of beauty and success. And this begins on page 77 for those of you who are in the paper copy of the book. I have the hardback here, and I'm guessing that the paperback page pagination is very similar, if not exactly the same. And so he starts on page 77 by saying that in America, in India, it's thought that if you have a round face and a round body, that you are wealthy and successful. Whereas if you have a round face and a round body in America, you're looked at as a person with a health problem. And the society judges us on the basis of what our society deems to be its values. And so then on the next page, the Mingyur Rinpoche starts talking about how the Buddha, even in his own life, the Buddha Shakyamuni, when he was still Prince Siddhartha, before he became an enlightened being, that he was thought of as being amazing because he was from this incredibly wealthy family and that he had every privilege in life and that he gave all those privileges up in order to become a wandering holy man and to look within himself to find the causes of suffering. And so what Mingyur Rinpoche says is that he asks how he says, I don't know how Prince Siddhartha might have felt riding away and running away from his palace. But he says, I shouldn't wonder that he didn't feel some type of release and relief from the expectations that were being heaped upon him as a prince. And so then he talks about some of the other stories that his students have told him, including the story of the two Canadian brothers, one of whom felt, even though he ended up in his life being more financially successful, he couldn't help but think that his older brother was actually more successful because he had his father, he was the apple of his father's eye, which was something that the younger brother craved. He craved his father's love and he felt it was lavished on his older brother, but he didn't get any of that. And instead he got judgment from his father, and that it really caused him a great deal of pain. He had a lot of jealousy of his brother because of the stories he told himself. Even though he was the successful of the two brothers, the more successful, he felt he was a failure because he wasn't as content as his older brother was. So we're always like making up comparisons with other things. You know, we're always creating stories within stories within stories to say why our life is great or why our life is awful. And then he talks about how there are still other ways that we can suffer by holding on to specific ideas about ourselves. By the time we get to page 80, he talks about his students who are on the other end of the spectrum, who think their life is wonderful because they've just found their soulmate, or they just gotten the job they always wanted, or they just bought their dream house. And then he talks in the next paragraph about like how the second noble truth of the cause of suffering is it makes us do this like really interesting internal balancing act where we try to have just enough happiness and just enough suffering to counteract each other so that we still feel like we're okay. And so what Mingyur Rinpoche says on page 80 is he says, words like attachment and grasping don't really capture the complexity of the underlying nature of this defense mechanism, which may best be described as a kind of balancing act between hope and fear. Hope that things will either change or stay the same, or fear of that things will change or be the same. He says, sometimes we're propelled in one direction or another, and sometimes we're caught between these two extremes and don't know what to think. And then he says that he's surprised that a lot of people still ask the question, how can I get rid of attachment? How can I get rid of hope and fear in myself? And Mingyur Rinpoche says that the solution from his point of view is to stop trying to get rid of it. Stop trying to get rid of attachment. Stop trying to get rid of hope and fear. And instead, examine your own mind to see what brings up fear. Examine your own mind to find out what brings up expectation. Instead of hope and fear, I like to think about the words, instead of hope, I like to think of the word expectation. We expect things to go our way. We expect things to turn out the way we want them to. And so, whereas I think the word hope can mean so many positive things that it's really hard for us to think of hope as being a bad thing. So that's why when I talk about this unrealistic hope, I think about expectation. And fear, we can think about anxiety and the anxiety that we feel that things won't turn out the way we want them to. And so what Mingyur Rinpoche then concludes this section and the whole chapter on page 81 by inviting his readers to do an experiment where they look at their thoughts and feelings. Here on page 80 at the bottom, he says, we have to stop trying to get rid of attachment and instead begin to look at what brings up our attachment. Look at the causes of it in ourselves. He said, when we try to get rid of something, we're really just reinforcing hope and fear. If we treat some condition, feeling, sensation, or any type of experience as an enemy, we only make it stronger. We're resisting or succumbing to it and succumbing to it at the same time. We're both resisting that thing we're trying to get rid of, and we're also falling victim to it at the same time. The middle way proposed by the Buddha begins by simply looking at whatever it is we're feeling or thinking. We have to say, I am angry, I am jealous, I am tired, I am afraid. And Mingyur Rinpoche says, as we look, gradually we'll come to notice that thoughts and feelings are not as fixed and solid as they originally appeared. Impermanence has its advantages. All things change, even our hopes and our fears. And so what he then asks and encourages his readers to do is to take a look in a mirror at their house, but they should look at the mirror in such a way as they don't see their face, that they only see the room that is reflected in it, and that they take 30 seconds. He said, this is not a long exercise. Take 30 seconds to look at what the room looks like and note what it looks like and note what it seems like. And then look at your own face and see how different your reaction is to your own face than it is to the background behind you. And he says, you don't continue this, he said, exercise for very long, maybe 30 seconds or so. Just notice any sort of mental or emotional reaction to the changes you see happening from day to day, because he encourages people to do this every day for several days and see what they notice about both the background and about their own face. He says, he said, I think my place looks tidier today, or I look tired, or I look old, or I look fat. Whatever thoughts or emotions come up will provide insight into the particular nature of your own biases and attachments. Don't judge them or try to analyze them. Just look at them. He says the point of the exercise is to begin to recognize that even the simplest act of sensory perception is invariably accompanied by a veil of thoughts and emotions through which you interpret it. If we continue looking, he said, we'll gradually find it easier to distinguish between bare perceptions and the mental and emotional factors that accompany those perceptions. Recognizing these factors doesn't mean we have to reject them or eliminate them. However, in pointing out the role of the mind in shaping our experience, the second noble truth, which represents the second stage of the Buddha's diagnostic approach to the problem of suffering, it prepares us for the prognosis of the third noble truth. And I actually would like to kind of pause here and see if what you're thinking is about this. Maybe you can look at your own life and look at the, I know Siddha Rinpoche told us to do this one time. He said, often when we're meditating, he said, we feel like we're fighting against hope and fear all the time. I'm afraid this will happen, or I hope this will happen, and so forth and so on. And he said, but we don't ever notice the themes of our mental afflictions. He said, you can't notice the themes of your mental afflictions while you are meditating. He said, but you can notice them when you are not meditating. So he said, someday after your meditation, take a moment, he said, to write down the things that are bothering you in meditation, the things that are coming up for you. And he said, after you've done this for several days, he said, you'll begin to see a trend or a theme begin to bubble up from among your thoughts and emotions. And this is how you will know the contours of your own personal confusion. I like to describe what's going on with each of us as that we all have a personal style of confusion. Some people are perfectionists. Some people are just laissez-faire. Other people are concerned with appearances. They want to change their appearance. Some people are concerned with what people think of them. But we don't really even know what our greatest concerns are, what our greatest mental afflictions are, because we're trying not to look at them. And so I just like this idea of getting to know your suffering, getting to know it really well. And you can begin to see how you think about things and how you think about things changes with time. So I don't know. Would you guys have any thoughts, questions, etc., that you'd like to discuss or mention or notice? So, and no thoughts about emotions, about your own mental afflictions? My gosh, I was really hoping we'd have some great sharing here. Maybe I should start with mine. I'm a perfectionist. It's a problem. I always compare myself to other people. And I find that maybe they're smarter than me. Maybe they're better than me in lots of other ways. And then I feel bad about myself. But the cool thing is that because I've been doing this practice of meditation for a long time, I'm beginning to notice how my grasping makes me suffer, how holding on to ideas about myself is making me suffer. And this is really cool because before I didn't notice it, and now I do. I hope this helps people a little bit.
It does. I think mine, Lama K, would probably be the acceptance factor. I used to never be able to accept, and I would just constantly just always think of, it was really hard, and I would create a lot of suffering for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just started I don't know how many years ago, but just complete acceptance and just move on, accept. And it's a life changer.
If you don't mind, I'd like to examine that a little bit, because I think
Yeah.
you're onto something. I really do. I think you're onto something. And I think part of it is because sometimes when we're telling ourselves a story about our life, like, oh, this always happens to me, or people always take advantage of me, or why am I so pathetic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's almost like there's several layers of story that we tell ourselves. And if we can begin to work with those stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, we can start to pare things down to the basics. I am afraid, or I am tired, or I am, whatever, right? And I think for me, that's what acceptance means to me. Am I close to what you're talking about here?
Yes. Yep.
Like, I have a habit of thinking about myself like this, and then fill in the blank. And recognizing this, tell me, I'm trying to think if I can think of an example. Do you have an example about this acceptance, what that would look like?
Well, for me, it would be just more of whatever happens. It does, like, if it's something for my business or in another human being, or how they are acting, a situation that presents itself that there's nothing I can do about because it has happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm coming from for the acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I used to be, I would just, I couldn't accept it. I would literally create torturous hell for myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's almost like it really comes down to what we can control, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
That somehow we feel I remember from that one movie of the one there was a movie and I believe this was a really old one, Ordinary People, where the therapist is saying to the young person, control is overrated. Having control of everything is it's overrated, which I think is really interesting all by itself.
Is that what Mary Tyler Moore was in?
Yes, that was the one.
Yeah.
And and I feel like after a while, well, here's a story from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's teachings. He told a story once about a young boy who was trying to learn to meditate with an older tutor. And the young boy developed an irrational fear. His monastery was at the base of a mountain. And because he was young, he had a great imagination. And he imagined that the fact that the mountain was so close to the monastery was built right up against the mountain. He developed the fear that the mountain was going to fall and crush the monastery. And it disturbed his meditation for days and days, but he couldn't express. He was afraid of how that people would laugh at him if he explained what it was that was bothering him. And finally, the tutor encouraged him, and he said, well, I'm afraid that the mountain is going to fall on the monastery and crush it. And the master said, oh, I understand that. Well, the next time you think that in meditation, allow the mountain to crush the monastery and everything will be fine. And that sounds like a very weird thing to say, but because it was this irrational fear, right? He just said, well, let it happen. And because again, what Mingyur Rinpoche is saying here, when you push against something really hard, then it actually makes more suffering. And what was that? A pain plus resistance equals suffering. I saw that on one of my on one of the desks at my therapist's office, and it really, it really meant a lot to me, because the harder we fight against something, and want to get rid of that thing, the stronger, more power it has over us. So I guess I can see where acceptance might help with that.
Yeah, 100%.
Thanks for sharing that. Other things that people might like to mention or talk about. We got some shy people here today.
I have something maybe.
I understand.
Lama Kathy, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
So I hope Charles doesn't mind if I say this, but I talked with Charles last time, and this is an experience. I don't know if it fits exactly in the category, but basically what happened is for me that there was something with our landlady. She was saying something and I couldn't help myself. I completely flew off the handle. Actually, before I started shouting, I sort of walked away. And then when I was coming back, I thought like, and this is where the thing was with Charles, because we talked about it, it's like, so I'm doing all this practice and all this meditation, and it takes one little spark and immediately it explodes. I thought I had all this control. So I guess that's my big weakness. I have to learn as well. It's maybe I'm on the way there, but I'm nowhere near close to controlling it, because I had no control in this second at all.
Yeah. Well, there's something to that. I think this does actually fit what we're talking about, getting to know where things are coming from, right? And how easy it is to get angry with things or feel bad about yourself because of something. And being able to recognize what's happening is actually kind of a powerful thing, right? And yes, I know we're all like that. I have that happen to me too, right? Because we've all been practicing meditation for a long time, but there are certain subjects or certain topics that probably go very deep in our karmic history, in our karmic history of ourselves, where we just have a real problem with it. It has to do with some kind of, I remember Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche said that fear arises. He said, fear is an identity problem, which I just thought was such an interesting thing to say. When a person is fearful, they're having an identity problem because they don't know who they are suddenly. In a situation, they don't know who they are, if they're the victim, or if they're the aggressor. They suddenly don't know who they are, and they have fear about who they are or who they aren't. But if they can relate to themselves in a different way, if they can relate to their Buddha nature, for example, they will have a different experience than if they don't. And so, yeah, it's okay to feel that disappointment in yourself. That's okay, because now we have something to aim our practice at. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche used to say, we're doing all of these mantra practices, and maybe we're doing the Nundro practice, or a mantra practice, or Tonglen or something, and we're accumulating merit. And he said, and we're not just, throwing it out into the void. He said, if you include an intention and aim your practice directly at the thing that is bothering you, you can say, may this mantra that I am reciting, or may this Nundro practice that I am doing, may it serve as an antidote for this. I remember one novel writer called it the descending of the red mist. Where you get irrationally angry, right? And so if you can want to aim your practice directly at that, that's a good thing. And in mind training and the Great Path of Awakening, you're asked to notice your moment to moment mental afflictions, and then take those mental afflictions and plug them into a formula. May the three objects three poisons, three seeds of virtue slogan. You know, if you feel anger or attachment or indifference, that you can actually take on the anger, attachment, and indifference of other beings and say, may my negative emotion contain the negative emotions of all beings. And by my working through this moment of negative emotion, may I and all beings be free of it. And furthermore, may we become Buddhas, which is the complete freedom from it. And so I'm wondering if maybe this approach, recasting ourselves not as the victim of our mental afflictions, but as the person who is stepping forward to shake hands with our mental afflictions, get to know them, and to work with them in the context of being a bodhisattva in training, right? Because we're trying to train our mind in love and compassion, both for ourselves and for others. And if we can use this formula, may my negative emotion contain the negative emotions of all beings. And by my working through this, may I be free of this emotion. May other beings be free of this emotion. And may we become Buddhas, which is the complete freedom from that emotion. You can see how that recasts the story that we tell ourselves about what's going on. We're no longer the meditator who failed to control their anger, right? We're not telling ourselves that story anymore. Now we're telling ourselves the story of, I am taking on the suffering of other beings and trying to turn where we are going into Buddhahood. Does that make sense?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I guess.
Yeah.
Max first, and then the other commenter.
Sorry, I won't take long. I was just saying, I think I realized as well, maybe you are right, because there is a little bit of a process there, because in this specific case, not always, I'm failing lots of times with this, but in this specific case, at least I had a recognition of a red mist coming, and I could like walk away just in time without doing it. So at least it's a little step forward, even so the feeling was still 100% there, without, and I knew at least I was able to walk away and not let it explode, which is a good thing, because I know, when I'm on my own, and I'm sure that's for everybody, you can calm down and you can think exactly that, like, first of all, why did this even happen? And the same thing, like sort of taking on the suffering. But it's just like in this moment, I was like, no,
I know.
be doing this. Why am I doing this?
Right. But see, here's the thing. And the good thing is you recovered and said, okay, there I go again, right? This is me. And you have like this disappointment, but then you can plug it in to the formula and say, hey, look, I take on the disappointment of all beings.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that's like the top level, right? The top layer of junk, right? Is, I feel bad about myself because I like failed. And, but you can then take that on, and then you can take on the anger, and then you get the point, is that like, you find a level of acceptance, which is, I think, what Jody was talking about, this level of acceptance for who you are and what you're working with, and that you have the capacity to change in that moment. And that you can actually see it coming, even if you can't stop it. So yeah, sorry for the other commenter, but I wanted to give Max a chance to finish that thought. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
We had another commenter.
Yes, no worries, Kathy. So, I always think with meditation and mantras that, yes, they're to be free of obstacles and obstructors and all of that. But that if you do your practice regularly and dedicated and all of that, whatever issues one has, and this may be totally magical thinking, and this isn't really my question, then they will get addressed, because the Buddha and the Dakinis hear and know all things, and they act in their own magical ways. But when I look in that mirror that you talked about at my environment, that for me is like my greatest failure. I moved during COVID into a much smaller apartment, and I got rid of a lot of stuff. And I also put some things in storage. And the fact that I still have storage is devastating to me because it's, $300 a month that I feel I'm throwing out. And when I look at my environment, it just fills me with total shame, because as many things as I've given away and donated and gotten rid of, I just can't make this place work for me. And I just feel overwhelmed, and like I've been obsessing about this for nearly 2 years, and I've made little progress in creating it into, a minimal jewel-like environment. And having had a mother who's deceased, who was an interior decorator, doesn't help any either. Okay.
That's that second layer of story. Like, I should really have this, but I don't have this, right?
Yeah. And plus, I really did have two very perfectionist and talented parents. And so, I just feel like
Put that on.
that saying, rolling in her grave, even though we know that's not exactly where she is.
That's not a thing. Yeah.
It contributes to my sense of failure and my shame.
Right. And so strategies for doing that, of course, for dealing with that is to recognize that this pattern is like super old. I mean, it's older than your parents. It's older than everything. It's like previous lifetimes.
Older than lifetime for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like older than dirt, and it's like,
yes.
So the pattern is just super deep and super old. And but there can be some like moments of compassion for yourself, right? And to say, well, here I am, sort of reenacting my upbringing and reenacting sort of the shame that I felt in this situation, or the shame I felt in that situation, right?
Not reenacting my upbringing, because every home I've lived in up until this one and the one before that had toxic mold and was its own disaster anyway,
yeah,
were pristine and lovely, and I entertained a lot and people wanted to come over. I won't even let anyone come here.
Yeah,
okay,
I know,
because I feel they would divorce me.
I get it. I get it. Well, see, and so there's some projection going on there as to how they might feel, and that, and so forth. And so at some point, what my buddies in 12-step recovery like to say, at some point, we're going to get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we may have to build alliances with people who are good at this. And actually invite people into our space who can help us to actually begin to cope, but it comes down to being a pragmatist about it and feeling some compassion for ourselves to take a step toward getting out of it, right? Because stasis has not been working, right? I mean, as much as we make
and my closest friends who love me in spite of if they happen to come in here, have moved away. One couple I've known for 30 years moved to Oregon. Two very close girlfriends moved to Florida. Three other friends moved to Texas. And it was all during COVID. I couldn't get help
when
I tried.
I get it. Well, then that means you get to invite strangers into your life to help you cope.
Well, I had to do that when I moved, and it was a disaster. I mean, I had a great mover, but everyone else that I hired to help me, it was just a nightmare. Things disappeared, things were broken. It was the most painful, traumatic experience.
Well, now I really appreciate you sharing about the pain and suffering that you have gone through with this. And it sounds like you have taken some steps to start repairing it. and that you recognize where the shame is coming from, and that you recognize that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas do have the power to help you if you call on them. And so hopefully you can build an alliance both with your own Buddha nature and your own compassion for yourself. If you were your own older sibling, you would probably take really good care of yourself and get some help with what's going on, right?
Well, there are things I really do need someone to move out this giant desk I have,
Yep.
etc. Right?
Yeah. Sounds
You
good.
know?
Lisa, you got a plan.
But there's one little dilemma. You know, I have a lot of books and Tibetan stuff and what have you. And like I said, I got rid of a great deal. Like, honestly, since I moved in, 10 bags a week of clothing, you know,
Yeah, I get it.
cookware, whatever. The real issue is the things that I do have that I love, I like more than I like. Their value is greater to me than this particular living environment. You, if I thought I could create like a jewel of a place here and live happily ever after, some of those sacrifices would be worth it. But, and you can only maximize space so much, right? So anyway, but I think the advice to get people and to help is actually good advice.
Yeah, because sometimes something has to come from the outside, it's, because I'm glad we talked about it though, because being able to experience and understand the feelings that you have about it, and the thing that you would like to have. I appreciate you being able to look at that and to see what's needed in the situation. And I'll definitely ask those dakinis and Buddhas to help you out. Okay.
Thank you. All the prayers that you make, well, I feel really grateful for, because clearly I have a block here. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for talking about this. I appreciate that. And thank you. I'm glad we're talking about our favorite mental afflictions, because becoming aware of that is really important. We have a little time left? Remind me again what time we close up, because I want to make sure I have a couple things I'd like to say before the end. Remind me.
It's usually about an hour, like 7:30, and it's 7:22.
Very good. Okay, just checking.
7:18 on my Apple clock.
What's that now?
I have 7:18. What time?
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Okay. So that means we've got about 10 minutes. So this is good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And so I want to see if anybody else has something to share before we move on. But I wanted to check in about that. Okay. All right. Well, then at this point, I'd like to, I'm really glad that we talked about this. And in Mingyur Rinpoche's book, he talks about he's talking about the second noble truth, about the causes of suffering. And he said at the very end, he said, in pointing out the role of mind in shaping our experience, the second noble truth, which represents the second stage of the Buddha's diagnostic approach to the problem of suffering, prepares us for the prognosis of the third noble truth. And so being able to watch and work with our minds is like super important. And so, and also build that compassion for ourselves into our experience of our mind. And that starts for many of us when we do meditation all by itself. And there's something that came up for me recently while I was teaching meditation. and the basic quiet sitting meditation that we all know and love. And it struck me that a person I was talking to did not understand the two aspects of quiet sitting: placing our attention on the object of meditation and then returning our attention when it wanders. The person did not know about returning their attention to the object. And because they were uncertain about that, they didn't understand that, they were then at that point very concerned. They felt a little panicked, like they didn't know what to do when their thoughts wandered. So I explained the process of noticing when they were distracted and gently bringing their attention back to the breath for like a fresh start. And they had that quizzical look on their face that you get when you think somebody's not understanding you. And it turns out they said, well, what's the gentleness for? And I said, that's for you. That's for your heart. Because frequently, when we are criticizing ourselves or telling ourselves something, we don't use a tender tone of voice. We use a harsh, judgmental tone of voice. And when we do that, we're causing ourselves some extra pain and extra suffering. And so if we want to practice that self-compassion, we can start practicing that self-compassion in our meditation itself. Because we heard earlier about the idea of judging oneself negatively. And you can actually negatively judge yourself when you're meditating. I remember when I first started learning, I used to think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get this, because I kept wandering. It wasn't until much later that my teacher reminded me that when you first place your attention on your breath or on the object, it will only stay there for a short period of time. And that invariably it will wander off, maybe into the past or maybe into the future. And that this is a natural thing to happen. You place your attention, it stays for a little while, but then it begins to wander off. And so understanding that is part of what you are doing in meditation. You're trying to understand what's happening. And so when you notice that you have wandered, you bring your attention back with this gentle heart, this patience with yourself, not using a negative tone of voice in your self-talk, and just gently bringing your attention back to the breath, gently, 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 and replacing your attention for a fresh start. So I'd like to know before we go, I would like to sit and do a little meditation with you and practice a little of this gentleness. So what I'd like for you to do is to place your body in the attitude or the posture of meditation. The back is straight. The hands can be placed palm downward on the legs. That's the position that was favored by Marpa, the translator. And providing oneself with some stability. You can place your attention on the breath. You can leave the eyes open gently and allow your gaze to be gentle as you let your eyes rest ahead of you. And then you can begin with the mental intention that you wish to practice meditation for the next few minutes for the benefit of yourself and other beings. And so we're going to start with one deep breath. Breathe out. And then let the breath come and go. And notice the breath as it comes in. Notice the breath as it goes out. And if you find that your attention is wandering away from the breath, gently, gently, gently bring your attention back to the breath. And so we're going to meditate for just a couple of minutes. Okay, thank you for that short meditation. I appreciate it. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you about meditation and Dharma. And when we talk the next time, we'll start on chapter 4 of Joyful Wisdom, where we talk about the turning point. That's the name of the chapter, and it starts with a quotation from the 9th Karmapa. Liberation occurs through recognizing just by that which you are bound. So by recognizing the things that we are attached to and seeing how our attachment brings suffering for us, this is a really good thing. Now, I promised you a song of Milarepa, so this might take another minute or two. There's a lovely in the 100,000 songs of Milarepa. There is this is in, I forget which volume this is, but this is in the chapter called The Offering of the Pigeon Goddess Girl. And it tells how non-human beings interacted with Milarepa. While he was in his cave one day, a pigeon flew up and circumambulated him and then flew away. And he sang to the pigeon, sang a song of wisdom, and then the pigeon came back with 7 other pigeons, and they all turned into goddesses and revealed their forms, and they prostrated to Jetsun Milarepa and made offerings to him and asked him to teach Dharma. And then so he talked about how important Dharma practice was. Then feeling a little bit ashamed of their pridefulness, the goddesses said, "We are ignorant sentient beings with afflictions firmly entrenched within our minds. Please teach us a method on which to rely for remedying this state with mindfulness." So they're asking how to use mindfulness to correct their mental afflictions. Then Milarepa sang this song of realization in reply. "I bow at the feet of Marpa," his teacher, "who is so kind. Grant your blessing that remedies arise well in my mind stream. You goddesses who are endowed with faith, if you want to practice in a continual way, inside, meditate with the discipline of shamatha. To abandon unnecessary activity is one great ornament. Outside, stably take hold of your antidotes. To relax body and speech is another great ornament. Continuously take the seat of mindfulness. To have few affairs is one great ornament." So he's encouraging them to watch their mind, which is what we've just been talking about. You're able to watch your mind and see these mental afflictions arise and work with them. And so the antidotes are things such as the Tonglen practice. I take on the suffering of other beings and so on. So now he says, when adverse conditions give the mind difficulty, be on the lookout for the arising of aggression. So in other words, he's giving them clues about what mental afflictions to watch out for and when to watch out for them. When encountering money and things of desire, be on the lookout for the arising of attachment. When the weapons of harsh speech fall upon you, be on the lookout for your ear's delusion. When accompanying friends who are equal to yourself, be on the lookout for the arising of jealousy. When praise and honor come your way, be on the lookout for the arising of pride. At all times and in every way, tame the demons within your own mind stream. Should 100 learned and righteous ones speak, There would be no better advice than this. Now, practice with joy in your meditation. So I just thought that would be delightful to say that even the great Milarepa knew his own mind and knew the minds of others so well, and that he was able to say what would bring about what outer conditions would bring about inner discomforts. So I hope this will be a little inspiring to you to keep an eye on your mind and be gentle with yourself. So that's my talk for tonight. Because of time, we have to stop here. But I want to thank all of you for bringing your genuine selves to our program this evening. And I hope that this will help you to develop some compassion for yourself and some inspiration to practice meditation. So I'll dedicate the merit of this evening's program, and then we'll be back next month to talk about the third of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of the resolution of suffering. So through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Thank you. Thank you, friends.